So how long are E2 processing times and how long is it going to take to obtain an E2 visa? In this video, I'm going to cover the various timeline related questions when it comes to E2 visas, including government processing, preparation, and other parts of these cases that may take some time. And my goal is that hopefully by the end of this video, you can make a good timeline or a good plan around how to approach your E2 visa application so that it fits your timeline when it comes to personal and business and other sort of life goals. First and foremost, welcome back to the channel. My name is Adrian Pandev. I'm an attorney who helps foreign nationals navigate the US legal system. I really appreciate all of you tuning in. If you like the video and if you like the content, please like it and subscribe to the channel. That has really kept me motivated on recording more of these videos, and I've really appreciated all of your support. So thank you in advance for that. Now, about the actual E2 visa process, which is the topic for today's video, the first part about it that I want to cover is the actual government processing. So how long will the government take to process an E2 visa or an E2 change of status, extension of status petition? Now, when it comes to E2 visa applications filed with US consulates and embassies, the answer, unfortunately, is it depends. Simply put, each and every consulate has its own processing times. So what I advise everyone to do, and what I do for all of my clients, is immediately check the processing times at the particular consulate at which the case is being filed. This can be done generally on the E2 visa website for that particular consulate or embassy, or by contacting the consular post and contacting what's called the non-immigrant visa section that processes e-visa applications, and they can provide information on processing times. When it comes to USCIS, it's a much firmer deadline because E2 visa cases can be premium processed for $2,805. And just to be specific, because I said E2 visa cases, that would be incorrect when it comes to USCIS filings. It would be an E2 petition for a change of status or extension of status because the individual is already in the US filing to just change their status without leaving the country or extending their E2 status. Now, in those cases, like I said, for $2,805, the government will expedite what's called premium process the case, and that means that in 15 business days, they will issue a response to the petition. Now, keep in mind that doesn't always mean that a decision is rendered in 15 business days because oftentimes the government will issue a request for evidence to which the petitioner still needs to respond. But because those expedited fees, the premium processing fees, have been paid, the government generally responds to any request for evidence responses and anything like that much faster. So generally speaking, an E2 petition that's premium processed will be adjudicated by the government in about a month's time, even if there's a request for evidence. If the case is not premium processed, then it really depends on current USCIS adjudication trends. Generally, what I've seen over the years is anywhere from 4 months to 8 months, and sometimes longer, but most of the cases we filed have been 4 months to 8 months for non-premium processed USCIS filings. Now, this part of it is just the government processing, right? When it comes to E2 cases, the government processing is just one part of it. Now, the other parts of these cases will also take time. Now, the first part is actually identifying the business and potentially if a business is being purchased, going through due diligence. But even if it's a new business where it's being built from scratch, is identifying the business and figuring out how long will it take to essentially make the relevant investments to get the business to a point where one can apply for an E2 visa. And if you have many more questions about this, feel free. I've recorded a video about the E2 visa requirements that goes into this in much more detail in the E2 investment. But the bottom line is, before one can apply for an E2 visa, the applicant has to form a generally US company or a series of companies, needs to make an investment. That investment needs to be put at risk. So essentially, there has to be several transactions and purchases and commitment of funds that needs to occur before you even get to the E2 visa. So a big part of this E2 visa timeline is that process. And the $1 million question I get from everyone is, okay, but how long does that take? And unfortunately, the answer is it really, really depends on your type of business. Some people come to me and say, hey, we've got a plan, we're ready to go. We just need company formations, and we need to be able to start transacting and can immediately thereafter apply for an E2 visa because we know exactly what we need to spend on. In those cases, this step may take as little as a few weeks, a month, right? In most cases, I find that it usually takes a couple of months, even very often 3-4 months, because there's just so much that needs to be done by the applicant. They need to think through the exact business's requirements, startup expenses. We need to form companies. The applicant needs to open bank accounts. Then they need to spend for the business. And that can very often take several months simply because most business owners want to be careful and they want to follow a strict plan and execute properly because they want their business to be successful. Similarly, when it comes to buying an existing business, the question is always, how long will due diligence take? Yes, in some cases it can take just a couple of weeks, but in many, many cases, issues are identified during due diligence. They need to be renegotiated, agreements need to be cleaned up, new entities need to be formed, spun off, etc. And that can, just simply put, take time. My advice to everyone with this is, don't rush this part of the process, because you want to make sure that it's not just about quickly getting a visa, it's setting yourself up for success and having a successful business once you get that visa. And often this preliminary planning stage will take some time, but what I've seen with clients, those that put in the time and think through it, once they get the visa, they kind of are able to immediately launch and scale their US company, which tends to work in their favor. Now, in addition to essentially initial planning, investment, negotiation, before you get to the visa application, there's another part here, which is essentially the preparation of the application, and that is a big part of what we do for our E2 visa clients, and that can often take several weeks as well, because once the client has the relevant companies and has made the investment, has committed the funds, paid for the various startup expenses, then an E2 supporting evidence packet needs to be created in which the applicant demonstrates that they meet all the E2 requirements. So essentially, treaty country nationality, ownership of the company that's 50% treaty owned, substantial investment, non-marginality, et cetera. Like I said, I recorded a video on all of these that you can watch to go through the requirements. But this evidence packet also needs to be prepared, and often this is the case will be adjudicated, approved, or denied based on this evidence packet. So it's definitely not something that should be rushed, and this can take, in many cases, several weeks, even up to a month, depending on the complexity of the case. Now, in addition to all of this, a lot of these cases, depending on the investment and where the foreign national applicant is from, there's a big part that is, call it investment, tax, business planning, right? Because you want to make sure that the structure is organized properly so that it's essentially tax efficient, so it protects the investor from liability. Oftentimes, this involves forming multiple companies, not just one company, and this also has to be considered. And for our clients, what I see is that this is generally, it's not a super long process because companies can be formed fast, but what I see is that oftentimes it requires also involving the foreign tax advisor of a client, because very often E2 investors will still have foreign tax liabilities and assets abroad, etc. So it may take definitely a couple of weeks, even up to a month, to make sure that tax advice is obtained from abroad so that the US tax team and just general like the legal team can execute the right strategy on the US side. Now, at our firm, we do all of this, right? So we do the E2 visa application, we do the company formations, we do all of this for our clients. But in some cases, one may be dealing with multiple different law firms in the US or different advisor groups, and that could essentially also take time. Now, the final part that could also add to this timeline is essentially business transactions. So some businesses do not require, a lot of different contracts and deals that have to go through before they can start operating. But for some for some businesses, it only makes sense to actually start the US business and start operating once a first major contract is locked in. Now, those contracts, and what I mean by that is a contract with a customer for a service or product that the business is selling. And often those contracts need to be negotiated, drafted, and there's some back and forth with that too. Now, the bottom line with all of this is that I don't mean to scare you. Generally speaking, I would say from the moment people reach out to us filing a case, an E2 visa preparation process that involves all of this, right? Tax planning, company formation, any contracts, due diligence, etc., does not take more than a couple of months. So generally 1 to 2 months is what I see to filing, but it could. And the reason I'm mentioning this is so that you're aware that the processing time, which is what everyone's most keen about and just wondering about, is a small, I think, component of the whole timeline for an E2 visa case, especially if you're working with many different advisors and providers, right? That being said, I do find one of the beauties of the E2 visa is that you can go directly to the consulate for many cases, right? So you don't have to go to USCIS, file a petition, and then go and apply for a visa appointment and wait for a visa appointment. You can immediately apply with the embassy consulate, which I do think speeds things up. And many consulates, like I said, are quite fast, literally a few weeks to a month to review an E2 visa application, which is great. The bottom line and your takeaway from this whole video should be that you should plan ahead. You should be familiar with the processing times of the particular consulate where you're applying, and you should also have a good plan in place with your advisors to make sure you have a timeline on how long it will take to actually do the business side, call it, and tax planning, etc. side of an E2 visa case, because I very often find that these cases are a lot of transactional work with a visa at the end rather than mainly visa immigration related work. In fact, if all the transactions are executed efficiently and planned out, the visa becomes much quicker and easier at the end of the process. If you have any questions regarding any of this, feel free to post any comments in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to record more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching.